Okay, let me go on to my lectures for the day. If you would be so kind, David, as to put up that photo that I gave you of a Shiley S100A oxygenator. Yeah, that's it. Let me grab a. Let me grab the what do you call this thing? The mouse. See if it's going to work. And hey, Magic, could you turn that monitor towards me because I can't see it? Okay, so this is the Shiley S100A oxygenator. I can't see my mouse though. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so what happens here in the back, thanks Magic, is the venous blood comes in like this, and there's what I would call the venous inlet reservoir is right here. This section here is the bubble chamber, and your water in and water out. It ran countercurrent to blood flow, which was from the bottom to the top as foam, right? So your venous blood came in like this. Oxygen came into an area where I call it the oxygen reservoir, and this was the best picture I could find of the S100A, so it's not the best picture. But separating this oxygen inlet reservoir and the venous blood inlet reservoir was a sparger plate. Basically, it was a flat, disc-shaped aquarium aerator that had, it bubbled the blood. And it was maybe a little more sophisticated than an aquarium aerator, but not by much. And anyway, so that would bubble the blood, and the foam would then come up, travel up, go down into the defoaming area, and then from there it would fill what is the arterial reservoir and then be pumped out and go to the patient. So you could take that down, and thanks. So what happened was, I was on bypass, we'd gone on pump, and this was a relatively young, healthy individual. I won't tell you where it was, or it was quite a few years ago. Obviously, it was many, many, many years ago. And so we go on pump, and everything seemed fine, just going flowing along. And all of a sudden, I heard, now the cross clamp was on. We were using cardioplegia, and I had hand squeezed the cardioplegia in because that's how we gave it back then. Even though I think there's some places that still do that. Am I looking here or there? No, over here, still over there? Okay. So I hear this, and then a pop. And I was like, I looked over to my right, because that's where I was coming from, and I see the cap, the end cap, which had the oxygen line going from the halophane vaporizer to the oxygenator, had popped off. So I stuck it back on. Seemed reasonable thing to do. And after about 5 or 6 seconds, maybe a little longer, I hear pop, and it pops off again. So now I'm starting to get worried. And as I said, the cross clamp was on, but fortunately it was a coronary, not a valve. So about that time, I start noticing that my arterial reservoir is starting to get dark. So I put it back on again, but now I was just getting really kind of anxious. And of course, it's just hissing, so it starts doing it again. And at that point in time, I made the decision that there was something wrong with the oxygenator. So I told the surgeon, I've got a problem. I have to change this oxygenator. And interestingly enough, and I'm glad I thought of this, and I'm going to give myself a little credit. Now, this is going back, like I said, this is going back about 25, maybe 26 years. About 25, 26, 80, let's say 87, 97, 2007. No, it's going back 33 years. Going back about 33 years. And I told him, take the cross clamp off. I got to fill the heart, start ventilating, and start hand massaging the heart, which is what they did. and I changed the oxygenator. Saved the oxygenator, okay? The new oxygenator went on, didn't have any problems. Patient ultimately did fine. There were no issues at all. Sent the oxygenator off. They found absolutely nothing wrong with it. There was nothing wrong with the oxygenator. So, what do you think it was? Phone lines are open. So if somebody wants to call and tell me what it was before I tell you all what it was. What I'll tell you, though, while I'm waiting to see if anybody can guess, is it was, yeah, I think it was a degree of experience. I had at the time about 10 years of experience. I came from a pretty intense training program, which was in Tucson, Arizona, what they call the other THI, the Tucson Heart Institute. And it was a tough program to get through. Did a lot of cases, had a lot of confidence. And I had worked for 10 years since I had, left when this happened. And had been at HUP at Philadelphia, had been at University of Colorado Health Science Center in Denver. So I had been a few places, which did some really tough cases and stuff. So I had a lot of confidence and I felt good about, how I managed the situation. However, and with that said, I was confident that it was not my fault, that there was something wrong with that oxygenator. Nothing wrong with the oxygenator, according to the manufacturer, Shiley, which I didn't believe at first. But then I started thinking about it. Then I started going, oh, I'll bet you I know what happened. And somebody's calling in. Cool. They're going to win a prize. Hello, you're on the air. Who's this?
I must have dialed the wrong number. I'm sorry.
You sure? Hey, Patrick.
Yeah. What's this?
This is Joe.
Oh, your
live
show
on
is
the
not
air.
live right now.
You're live on the air, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm seeing it a little bit behind because I paused it. But here's what my thought is. Let me just turn that off so I don't have to watch it and get confused. Okay, is it possible that there was a clot that was blocking the airflow from the bubbler?
That's a great suggestion, but that wasn't it. But you're definitely on the right track. This was my fault, though. This was something I did. It ultimately ended up being I caused it, and actually I duplicated it. I could duplicate it.
So was the reservoir perhaps not vented?
No, that wasn't it. You were on the right track originally.
Well, I can't think of anything else other than those two things.
Okay, well, you get a consolation prize.
Okay, I'm going to go back to watching the show.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Fast forward because I'm ahead of you.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so I'm going to give it another couple of seconds and see if anybody else can tell me what I did wrong. Now, Patrick's idea was it was a really good thought. There was a clot that was obstructing essentially the gas sparger plate. And so that was the oxygen sparger plate, because we used 100% O2 at the time. There was no such thing as a blender for a bubble oxygenator. So with that said, anybody else have any ideas before I reveal what I did wrong? Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay, so Patrick, if you're watching, let me show you what happened. Can you put that picture back up? So what I did that morning when I primed the pump was what I do every day. Let's see if I can get this mouse to work. No mouse. There it goes. Okay. So remember I told you here, I quit. There's there. Now it's moving. That's you? Okay. Yeah, why isn't mine working? Okay, so anyway, remember I told you that the oxygen comes in at the very bottom. There's a little section oxygen reservoir, and you can actually see it. It's clear, a little space. Then above it is the sparger plate, and then right above that is where the venous blood comes in, and then the oxygen bubbles through it. So I primed the pump like I normally do, and I added 25 grams of mannitol. But I didn't turn the gas flow on when I primed the pump. And when I did, the prime with the mannitol in it leaked down through the sparger plate into that little oxygen reservoir area that I told you about. And then when I turned the gas on, which was 100% oxygen, and usually it's cold, and it's bubbling up through that sparger plate, it crystallized all the mannitol within all of the pores and essentially obstructed the oxygen from being able to get through, which created the back pressure, which blew the line off of the halothane vaporizer, which is what we were using at the time. So going back to this issue, and I duplicated it. I did it again. I said, I know what I did. I know what happened. I figured it out. I don't know how it would have felt if the patient had suffered any ill consequence. They suffered nothing, zero. They did just fine. Didn't even know it happened. But it scared me, man. It scared me. I was like, wow. But I could have taken a different approach. I could have just taken an oxygen tank and hooked it up and ran it in there. It would have spent more time. Would it have mattered? You know, at that point in time, I'm not sure. I can only say that I made the decision to change the oxygenator very quickly. And that's not always the right decision. Sometimes you change the oxygenator, which is a pretty dramatic thing to do, and it ends up being the oxygen line or some other issue, the source from the wall. So you really have to make a split, a really split second clinical decision to make a decision of what you're going to do, and you hope it's the right one. And so I think I was very blessed that day. Somebody was looking out for me. The perfusion guys were looking out for me. Didn't want my career to end. And like I said, the patient did fine. But it taught me a very strong lesson. It taught me a lesson that there's a reason why they always said, don't prime this pump, this oxygenator, without gas flow running. That was in the MFU. If I'd have followed the directions and not done that, or if I would have thought ahead that, I didn't have it on, this mannitol has gone down, maybe I shouldn't have put the mannitol in the prime, maybe I should have waited until before I went on pump. A whole bunch of different things. But it taught me an important lesson. It taught me how easy it is to make a mistake, how easy it is for something to just go horribly wrong, and this could have ended very differently. Essentially what I'm saying is it tightened me up. At that point in time, I thought I was the best perfusionist that ever walked the face of the planet after 10 years. I learned very quickly that I'm anything but that. Was anything but that then, am anything but that now. So there's the first of these cases. Patient, like I said, did great. It was over 30 years ago. I don't know if that patient, he was a pretty young guy. He might still be alive as far as I know. I hope he is, and he has a great golf game. Okay, so that's that first case. How did I do on time? Pretty good? Yeah. Good, okay. This next one is a little bit more complicated because it's maybe a little more contemporary. You know, I'm never going to tell you where any of these things happened. But this patient, too, did fine, so I want to tell you that up front. However, it was an Ecmo, and we made a decision that we were going to change the oxygenator. Now, normally at this time, at the time I'm talking about, whenever it was, I would change it by myself. I usually didn't want any help. I could do it myself, and I was comfortable doing it by myself. In fact, I felt better doing it by myself. However, in this particular circumstance, I had gone in to help someone else who was not as familiar with our system that was monitoring the Ecmo for us on this particular evening or at night. So I took a whole nother system, and we got the one system, got the patient primed up, ready to go, got their oxygen, turned the ventilator on at max support, tried to give them a little bit of reserve before we did this. And this patient needed to be on ECMO. This patient's lungs were not doing well at all. And so we wanted to do it fairly quickly. So we clamped all the lines, disconnected them, connect the new circuit up, turned it on, and immediately upon turning it on, it all looked fantastic. The patient's saturation started coming right up, looked great. I was like, oh, good. That was a really good, that was a great switch out. I was really happy. And I just wasn't really looking. I just felt good about it. In fact, I was relishing in our efficiency. And so the next thing you know, the blood pressure starts to plummet. The blood pressure's going from a good blood pressure to not such a great blood pressure to a really bad blood pressure. And then they were starting to go get the crash cart, and I was just perplexed with what is the problem? Why are we having this problem? Well, we used a priming bag. And so normally if I just did it myself, I would have already disconnected all of that, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time. So the recirc line from the top of the oxygenator that's used for de-airing was still connected to the priming bag. And when I looked up, I could see the priming bag looked like a tick full of all the patient's blood. And the blood pressure is really, really low. Like I said, they're bringing the crash cart in. This guy is ready to code. So I was like, well, okay, this is a problem. And I've got to now get all of that blood back into this patient, but the lines are connected to the patient. So I was like, okay, I know what to do. So I took 2 clamps. I turned the flow all the way down first. I clamped between the patient and the cone, and there's a lower lock there. Actually had a pigtail on it. I clamped it. I took the priming bag and flipped it upside down, and then I took the line from the priming bag, making sure I turned that stopcock off, and I put it into the oxygenator, or that line between the patient and the pump head, took the other end of the line from the top of the oxygenator, because I had to reverse it, right? Because there's a one-way valve in it. I had to be thinking about that, or it wouldn't have worked if I'd have done it the other way. So I put that into the bottom of the bag and had the person who had come in to help hold it, turn the stopcock, I didn't even take the clamp off. I took the clamp off between the stopcock and the pump head, left the other clamp on, turned the pump on, and ran all of that volume back into the patient. And all this happened within, I mean, really it was seconds. I mean, maybe it was a minute and a half. I don't know. It was fast. It seemed like it was taking an eternity. But all of that volume, as that volume went in, the blood pressure bloop, 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 came right back up. And we got all the volume in. I disconnected that, took the other clamp off, reestablished Ecmo. The saturations looked great. Patient looked great. Patient ended up getting off of Ecmo and actually going home. Patient suffered, again, no ill consequences. However, that was a pretty close call. There's a lesson there, though. The lesson is that when you have more than one cook in the soup, you're likely, you've heard the saying, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? It's true. When something like that is happening, you really have to be aware that things you normally do as a habit is not necessarily what another person is going to do, which brings up yet a different issue. There's another issue here. You know when most incidents occur in perfusion problems? They occur, if you don't know. If you do know, call in. If you don't know when it occurs when people are switching. Whether you're on pump or whether you're on Ecmo, that transition of one clinician to another is one of the most dangerous times for that patient's journey for their need for extracorporeal circulation, regardless whether it's during a heart operation or whether it's during Ecmo or whatever the procedure may be. We don't seem to switch off very well. In this case, it was just another set of hands. Another set of hands, but two people not necessarily thinking exactly the same or assuming everybody has the same understanding. You break your routine, and when you do, you increase your risk for making a mistake, which is what I did. But once again, fear not. The perfusion gods were still shining brightly upon me because the patient ultimately did great. So, before I go into my third discussion or third case, which is going to take longer than the first two, we may take a short break. Is there anybody that would like to call in and maybe tell me about your case? So can we take maybe a 5-minute break, and I can get a drink, get some iced tea, and wet my lips, and then we'll see if anybody calls in and has a case they would like to discuss. I'd love for you to do that, and we can be back in 5 minutes. Is that be okay, David?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's go to 5 minutes. We can play our commercials. We can make sure that our supporters are happy with us because they do pay for advertising, like I said, even though I rarely ever do any. I don't think we've ever talked about their device ever, which is why I think they have so much credibility that they don't ask us to do that. This isn't a commercially biased program. This program is about real information. We want you to really learn something. And look, right now I'm standing here, I'm hoping somebody out there will learn from my mistakes because I've made quite a few. This next one, even crazier. So let me tell you about the third case. The third case has to do with another Ecmo. And there's a theme to this like there was the other one. The theme has to do with when you have more than one person. Now, this patient too needed to have their Ecmo changed. The oxygenator was failing, it was getting wetted out, whatever it might have been, and it just needed to be changed. So again, I tend to like to do it myself, and I have a way to do it, a way that I like, that I'm comfortable with. Now, we could discuss this too. This is yet a different topic, and I'll go off on this tangent too. I like to change the Ecmo from the catheter connection to the catheter connection. I do not like to only change the lung. I change it all. In my view, the volume, the most of the volume is incorporated in the lung. That is responsible for most of the dilution that occurs. The tubing and the pump head, yes, it contributes, but percentage-wise lower than it does from the lung. In addition to that, when I change it catheter connection to catheter connection, whether it's VV or VA, doesn't make any difference, just from where the catheter is to where the catheter is, or catheters if it's not a single cannula or if it's double cannulation technique. And I immediately, upon separating those, connect them together with a 3/8 straight connector that has a lower lock and a stopcock on it, and I put it to the side. Then I connect the other Ecmo, and I go back on Ecmo. Now, notwithstanding, sometimes if your patient is already hypervolemic, this could be something that's a bit of a challenge, but if they're diuresing, not a problem. If they're on CRRT, not a problem. And then after I've reestablished my flow, I then take and connect an IV bag to that system, clamp the line, and run all of the blood by chasing it from the system into a bag that then goes to the nurse, who can then drip that blood in over the course of time. That's what I like to do. However, the person that is helping me in this circumstance only wants to change the lung. So since they were kind enough to help me, and this was a very unstable patient, this patient was a real problem. This was going to be, even though we can do it very quickly, it was going to be scary. So they wanted to just change the lung, and I deferred. Again, not a good idea as far as I'm concerned. When you're used to doing something a certain way, you'd think I'd learn from the first time. Don't do it differently the second time. Do it the same way. Do it how you are comfortable doing it. But nevertheless, we did. So this person, smart guy, very, very, very bright, certainly does it effectively himself, and is a fantastic clinician and somebody who I really like, value, and trust. He had tape all over everything with labels and what the line was and some other stuff, just a lot of tape and a lot of information, a lot of labels. So we took clamps and we clamped all the lines. I clamped my side, he clamped his side. We had the lines all cleaned up and all that kind of stuff. Used sterile scissors, cut the lines, connected the new lung. Then I did my side, connected the new lung, and then reached over and turned the flow up and took the clamps off of the new system, and nothing. There was no flow at all. So I'm looking, they're looking, we're looking, and we can't see what's wrong. Can't figure it out. Well, the pulse ox is going, started off, we preconditioned them, turned the vent up all the way, had everything ready to go, and it's bleep, 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 bleep. Then they started slowing down. The bleeps came longer and longer apart. Bleep, bleep. Well, as you can imagine, I was pretty sure this patient was going to code too, but I could not for the life of me figure out what was wrong. I looked at everything again. They looked at everything again. And then it came into view what I had done. If you know what it is, if you think you know what it is, you can win a special prize if you can tell me, and I'll just tell you in advance, no, there was not a clamp on that we didn't see. That was not the issue. I would have hoped it would have been that simple. Was not the problem. If you know what it is, call the number and tell me what you think it is. You will win a prize today. A big prize. Patrick, if you're listening and you think you know, because I'll bet you do know. But if you do, call in. How long should I wait till somebody calls? So while they were waiting for somebody to call, instead of there just being dead air. Oh, somebody's calling. Somebody is calling. I am so excited. Hello, you're live on the air. Hello, you're live on the air.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. Who's this?
This is John Ingram. Can you hear me okay?
John, hey, bud. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you got really pushed some buttons here. So I want to tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm going to take a shot at your question because even if this is wrong, it would have caused what you said.
Okay.
I'm going to say that the oxygen line was connected to the outlet of the oxygenator, not the inlet.
No, but good thought. Good thought. But that wasn't the answer. It's not what happened.
Okay.
So what do you think about the lecture? Or at least the discussions? How do you feel about the discussions? Have I said anything? Have I been provocative enough? Do you think I need to be more provocative? What do you think?
I thought you were I think it's terrific, but I thought you were going to hit on actual cardiopulmonary bypass cases where the manure hit the circulating blade and it had some 20-hour ordeal, cases you wish you could forget. That's my impression of what you were going to talk about. But what you're doing is fascinating. It's hit a couple very strong nerves with me. In fact, it made me think of some things that I had forgotten about. And I wanted to, once you're done with this third story, I have one that relates very closely to your second story that I think you would like, that I'd like to share.
Yes, please, go ahead. I want to hear.
Well, this is really interesting because what you said about that case on the Ecmo, where you basically exsanguinated the patient into the prime bag.
Yes.
That's
such John, that's such a nice way of putting it.
Okay, good.
I shifted. I like to say I shifted their volume as opposed to I exsanguinated them.
Yeah, well, that's like saying sanitation engineer too.
Exactly.
So I'm doing a case. I'm a first year into my new job. This is way back in the 80s, so no one's going to be able to figure this out. And I went to a place that had two 35-year experienced perfusionists that actually started as OJTs in 59 and 1961 and had been there ever since. They had tremendous experience, especially in this hospital and in this circuit. So we had a rule where if you were off call, you got relieved at 3 o'clock, and the on-call person came over and took over your case. At 3 o'clock, that was the great thing. You got to go home. So you did mention something about errors happening when we transferred people to the other case. Well, this case, first of all, it was a redo case, and that was all fine and good. So in order to, I don't know if you've ever experienced this or people do this very often now, but years ago we would sometimes femorally cannulate a redo patient so that we could go on pump, collapse the heart, and that would be a safety measure for opening the chest and not having the saw go into the chest, right? So we did that. And once we opened the chest and we got everything ready, we then centrally cannulated. And the case was very unremarkable. Very, very good case. Other than being a redo and some of the things that go along with that, it was an excellent case. We were done with the case. We decannulated the patient, and we were basically closing the chest and about to close the skin, and the lines were sitting up on the table. So what could go wrong? Well, the person comes to relieve me, the perfusionist of 35 years. In fact, he was the chief. He comes in at 3 o'clock, and I'm telling him, look, we're pretty much done here. You just got to pass the lines off and throw them in the red bag and have a nice day, and everything's great. And he's like, okay, terrific. So I walked back to the locker room, and it was inside the OR. And all of a sudden, I'm changing my clothes, and I hear code blue OR number 3 or whatever it was, and that's my patient. That's my case. They're calling a code inside the OR. And I'm halfway changing my scrubs, and something came over me to say, let me put my scrubs back on and go back in there and see what is going on. And there was no reason for me to do that. The perfusionist had 35 years experience, and the anesthesiologist was 20 years, and the surgeon was 20 years, and there was just no reason a first-year grad, what would I add to the situation? But something came over me, so I went back in there, and lo and behold, the perfusionist has thrown the circuit into the red bag as he was, and I'm like, so-and-so, what's going on? He goes, I don't know, but somehow they seem to have exsanguinated this patient. And I look into the bag, and all the patient's blood is inside the oxygenator. Now, nobody in the room could see that, but when I looked and I saw it, and it occurred to me what had happened. I grabbed the circuit, put it back on the pump, and what had happened was they still had the femoral venous line still in the patient.
Yep.
And when the perfusionist took the clamps off, and they took the clamps off at the table, it completely emptied the patient out into the reservoir.
I was going to say it. I was going to say it. I would have figured that out.
So that was all covered. Once they did it and they went to the chest, it was all covered. Nobody saw it for hours and hours after it happened. It was all covered with their drapes and towels and things. People had completely forgotten about it. And so he came in, he didn't know that, and I had totally forgotten about it. I think everybody in the room had forgotten about it. So when he took the clamps off the tubing to throw it away, it completely emptied the patient. Well, I thought of that. I saw it. I put it in the pump. I put the clamps in a certain way because we fortunately had the ability to pump blood up the venous line. We had a arterial venous shunt line, connecting the two. And so we were able to give blood up the venous line. So I quick filled the entire patient back up, and the patient did perfectly well. Amazingly enough, the blood did not clot because this was well after the protamine was
That
in.
is amazing.
So,
you probably had enough heparin in the pump still.
Maybe, yeah. It completely didn't clot at all. We were able to give all the blood back, and the blood pressure came straight up, and everything was wonderful. And it was just a quick, 2-minute thing. It was all done, believe it or not. And I just thought to myself, and I think to myself to this day, what made me put my scrubs back on? I was walking out of the locker room out into the hallway to leave, and I said, let me put my scrubs back on. So I quick did that. And I just wonder to this day, what made me do that? Isn't that amazing?
The reason, yes, it is, but I can easily see that, John. the reason why you're in this business, I think everybody that's in the healthcare industry has this thing that's in us that we want to take care of patients. We care about people, we want to help. We want to, and you hear code blue on a case that you just did, you've got a commitment. There's a commitment that we have that extends far beyond our need to make it to our, dental appointment or our tea time or our, even sometimes our own kids' birthday parties. I can easily see why you did that. Did you hear me? John?
Yeah, it broke down for a minute, but yeah, I got you. Are you there?
Yes,
I
I'm
wanted
here.
to say one more thing. I think you ought to have a webinar. Now that you're talking about it, maybe we can talk about it now too, but there's a big, I think, dilemma between one perfusionist on a case and two perfusionists on a case. And I know you were hitting on that a minute ago where two people, a lot of times I find more errors occur with two people. And I know there's a big push on the country. There's a lot of places that you have to have two people. A lot of people maybe even were trained and prefer it. And there probably are some goods and some bads, but I think it may be pretty equal. And I'm not talking about having a second perfusionist in-house should you need something or should you feel ill or whatever. But two people sitting behind the pump, I personally do not need someone to turn my heater cooler on for me or to push a cardioplegia timer. I'm not sure, and I'd like to hear from people who do two people on a case. What is that other person doing that you find so needful? Because I certainly don't.
I don't know. In fact, I agree.
What I find is that two people socialize the entire time while you're doing a case. They're not running the case. It's not that. It shouldn't be that difficult for you to do. If do I need someone to charge for me? I don't. But I think maybe one day we could have a debate about that with two people on one side and two people on the other, and because I know people feel very, very powerfully strong about two people on a case. I've just never seen the advantage to it. And what were your thoughts about that?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think that, that was something that was pushed years ago, and actually it really started with Mike Dunaway and the company Sycor, and that was one of his big selling points, I guess, if you will. So I think that ideology got started I don't really think for safety's sake, but I think that, people have associated, for example, when and I know this happens a lot, people don't like it, but, when you talk about aviation and perfusion being very similar, you look at accidents and why they happen, and everybody's always comparing aviation to the communication, let's say, between the perfusionist and the surgeon. I'm a big believer in communication. I don't think it is appropriate to have, for example, hand gestures to signal whether you should go down on your flow, up on your flow, come off, go on, whatever it might be. When you're flying, and I'm a pilot, so I come at this with some level of, I guess, perspective experience. The air traffic control will tell you something, and you're expected to repeat it back as they said it, and then they will repeat back or say to you, read back correct, or no, this is what I need you to do. So, I think.
Let me ask you this, because I don't know the answer to this. What is the co-pilot doing that the pilot cannot do? Forget about the air traffic controller. What is the co-pilot doing that the pilot cannot do?
Yes, that's a very good question. And when you are there's only one PIC, right? So the pilot in command, PIC stands for pilot in command. So when you're on one of these big jet lighters, you have one pilot. The co-pilot or first officer or whatever you want to call them usually is a junior pilot, and or less senior than the PIC. But the FAA and aviation experts all recognize you can't be having debates in the cockpit. So even with bombers back in the days of the war, or having a co-pilot with a B-52. There has to be one person who is in charge, and that is the PIC. All things fall on their shoulders. So the first officer or co-pilot is going to do what the PIC will let them do or will give them as a task to do. Now, there are protocols. In other words, when they're going through the checklist, the first officer will say something, read it out of the manual, and then it will be done. They will check. They'll say check, they'll have affirmed that they did it. And so there are some tasks that are designed for two people to do. But when the plane is actually flying, or there is an emergency of whatever sort it may be, the pilot in command is the only one in charge. The other person may do what they are asked to do, but they cannot do anything if it is not cleared, either part of the protocol or cleared by the pilot in command. So the pilot may say, hey, you got the controls, I'm gonna just chill out. And they might even let the guy land the plane, depending on the airplane and a variety of other factors. They may not, it's really hard to say. But they're there because if the pilot, of course, has a problem, some of these jets are very sophisticated and they need two pilots just to manage all of the systems. You can't do it by yourself. It's too complicated. But as far as, let's say, a smaller commuter jet, they're there just for safety. If the pilot goes down, you don't have 130 people in the back that have nobody who knows what to do and fly that airplane. Predominantly, that's the reason, but also the reason is that a lot of these bigger airplanes are just that sophisticated. Our heart-lung machine is not that sophisticated that one person cannot run it. So I would agree with you. I don't think it's a good idea, and in many ways, I think it interferes with the good flow of the case, especially when you don't really see things the same way. So, doesn't make sense to me. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I think I said we should take this to a different webinar discussion because there's. I mean, when I've got two people in a case, I've noted at least 2 or 3 instances per case when, oh, did you do that? No, I did. Oh, I thought you were going to do it. No, I thought you were going to do it. Like,
Exactly.
grab a blood tube, or oh, hey, if I do something for the main perfusionist, I've got to tell them, oh, hey, I turned your heater cooler on such and such. Oh, no, I want it on 39, not 39 and a half. I mean, he could have just done it by the time we bounced back and forth. And really, I think more times than not, we're irritating the surgeon. More times than not, we're irritating the surgeon with socializing that wouldn't go on if you were not having that second person there. But getting
exactly,
back to
would
the
be
thing,
socializing with the surgeon. I understand.
Yeah.
That's what they're upset about, is we're not socializing with them. Okay, so let me tell you what happened, since you're on the phone. Or I guess,
I'm gonna. How about if I hang up and listen, Joe? So
okay,
somebody
that
else can
sounds
call.
good. And then you can send a text or something like that or whatever. See if somebody else wants to call in too. So let me tell
Okay.
you all. John, thanks for calling. It's always great to hear from you. So thank you again. So let me tell you what happened. Okay, now keep in mind, this patient is just really getting ready to code. It's bloop, bloop, really slowing down. This is really not going well. And of course, I'm just beside myself thinking I'm going to hurt this patient and I can't figure it out. And then I saw it. I reconnected the old oxygenator to the new line. They reconnected on the other side the new oxygenator, but I disconnected, cut the lines, and then just reconnected the same oxygenator that we're changing. So the clamps were where they needed to be, but so they weren't obstructing the new circuit. It's that I had the old circuit, which was clamped out for obvious reasons, connected back to the outlet line. That's what happened. And listen, it was pretty horrible because I couldn't find a clamp. I needed a second clamp. We had set it down somewhere. And I was sweating. And I was getting real anxious. And I was just waiting for this guy to code. And finally, I thought I was just asking for a clamp, maybe forcefully, but asking for a clamp. I finally saw one and grabbed it, clamped the lines, reconnected it the way it needed to be reconnected, turned it, took the clamps off, turned it on. Lo and behold, the flow started, the pressure, the saturation, it lagged, but it came back up. The heart rate started speeding up again, and the patient ended up being stable and doing ultimately just fine, endured that situation. And going back to John's thoughts that he just called in, is I again did something that I normally don't do. There were 2 of us doing what I think really should be done by one person. And it was not only done the way I'm just not comfortable doing it, it was done in a way that was, and in my view, it was too busy. There was too many, there was tape and there were labels. And I mean, I don't need all of that. I just want to go from this point to that point. That's all I want to do. Again, I feel, this is how I feel philosophically. A lot of people would disagree with me, and I respect that. And if you disagree with me, send me a note, send me an email, call in, whatever you want to do. I'm happy to have the discussion with you. I feel if you want to have a second person, they're there to just help you do it your way, whatever that way is that you're used to doing it. That's really, I think, my takeaway message to this is you can only have one person in charge. Two people in charge don't work. You know, I mean, the most efficient form of government is a dictatorship. That's a fact. Now, you never can find a benevolent dictator, and they're usually despots or become one at some point in time. But our form of democracy, as successful as it's been for whatever reason, is grossly inefficient. Everybody's always fighting with each other, and you need these votes, and you need this, you need that. But when you're in an operating room or you're in an ICU and you have a critically ill patient, yeah, okay, you got a couple of minutes. You get away with it, you know. People can tolerate it, a couple of minutes. But after a couple of minutes, it's getting pretty tight. And it's not good for people. So I just believe that in order to be safe, one person you have to agree who's in charge here. Whose case is this? Who's making the decisions? Who's giving the orders? Who's following the orders? That's it. Now you can come up with a plan. I don't have a problem with that. But the plan has to be agreed upon, but one person has to be the maestro. One person has to be the captain. One person has to be the perfusionist in command. One person has to be in charge. The other person can be there to help, facilitate, do what is asked of them, not doing things that you're both thinking the other person is doing, or you double the effort when it didn't need to be done. So, with that said, after it was over, I thought it went, you know, all things considered, pretty well. And I remember saying to everybody, thanking everybody, said, you know, thanks very much for all your help, because a lot of people were in there at that point in time helping, because it fell apart. But anytime something falls apart and there's a big commotion, you always get a crowd, right? That's always going to happen. So I'm just, you know, thanking everybody and said, you know, it went pretty well, and I'm really proud of everybody remaining remarkably calm. Well, as you can imagine, they started chuckling, and I was like, what's the chuckling for? And they said, well, one of the nurses said, well, yeah, we all remain remarkably calm except you. And I felt really bad about that, but it really did happen. I didn't realize how remarkably uncalm I was until it was all said and done. And even now, I still don't remember. I thought I remained remarkably calm. So with that said, the lesson again is getting back to this issue and the things that John brought up, is that you can't have two cooks. You can't have two perfusionists. You can have two perfusionists. You can, if that's what you want to do. I think that's silly, but if you want to do that during your procedures and you think it's necessary to have two perfusionists there, that's fine. But I believe that you increase the risk of problems unless you have clearly defined roles. I'm in charge. This is my case. This is how I'm going to do this case. And if I need you to do something, I will ask you to do it. Or you have a protocol that is written that everybody understands, that I will draw the labs, you will do the labs. You're going to chart. I'm going to watch the level. I'm going to give the cardioplegia. You are going to manage the vent. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. But again, that's how some people choose or want to do things. And I respect that. I don't agree with it, but I still respect it if that's what you want to do. I just think if you don't have a clearly defined set of roles and responsibilities, the risk of something not being done is higher than if you just have one person. And then when you have two people like that, what do you do when there aren't two people and you're not used to being there by yourself? I really view it as an individual sport. Middle of the night, both of you going to go in for an emergency, a type 1 dissection, which is really going to be busy, with selective, cerebral perfusion and deep hypothermia, circulatory arrest, and the whole 9 yards. I don't know. I think it makes more sense to do it individually. Now, And with that said, I'm getting older. As I've gotten older, and I don't do as many cases as I used to. Certainly, I used to do a lot of cases. Now I can still do cases. In fact, I just got through doing 2. Both patients did just fine. But usually now I enjoy having somebody around, but we make we talk about it up front. Look, I'm going to do this case. If you could just hang out, that'd be great. If I get myself in trouble, you can maybe help me get out of it if that's the case. But just if I need another set of hands, I might ask him to chart for me because I hate doing that. But at the end of the day, I'm doing the case. I don't expect them to do the case and me just stand there. I'm doing the case, but I like having them around. So I think a program that has the ability, like these big institutional programs, to have somebody that's a floater that could go into a room and help if things get crazy and somebody just needs a helping hand for some reason for a short period of time. I think that's nice. Even though we're a private practice, and we work very independently, we're a lot like that. We can get somebody into just about any hospital almost as fast as you can, given the size of the medical center complexes. We can about get somebody into the hospital, in a community-based hospital that was somewhere else, but driven there, parked, and in the operating room almost in about the same amount of time it might take you to get all the way through the medical complex at some of these big institutions. I think somebody's calling in. Go ahead. Hey, phone line's open. This is Joe. You're on the air.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, it's me again.
Patrick, hey. Oh, so nice to hear from you again.
Yeah, so good to hear from you. So, remember that time that you and me, I don't have a point to this story, but I remember being involved with you and I, thank you very much, Dad. Sure. You and I were involved with a case where we were giving cardioplegia and the bloodline on the cardioplegia split.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes, I remember that very, very, very well, actually.
Yeah, I have to say you were very calm and collected, and, we made it through. But,
yes,
you handled the emergency very well, I thought.
Yeah, and it really wasn't even...
It was your case.
But it really wasn't an emergency. It was a problem, but that really wasn't an emergency. I think that was when you had, you had recently gone and gotten yourself recertified. You had been out of the industry or out of doing cases for almost 10 years, if I remember. I may be wrong, but I think that's what it was.
That's close, yeah.
Yeah, and so you had been, had not done cases in a while, and I think that, that your view, I mean, let me ask you this. If that same circumstance happened today, and can I just tell everybody what it was? It'd be easier.
Sure.
So what Patrick is talking about is we were doing a procedure, and the tubing had gotten pinched in the raceway and had actually split, so that the cardioplegia delivery line it wasn't the cardioplegia line, Patrick. It was the vent. It was the vent that was split.
No, I'm entirely sure it was the cardioplegia line.
Okay, so it was the blood. It was the blood side, or we're doing 4-to-1, I guess, in the single roller head. So it wasn't a double roller head. Okay.
Yep.
Well, so it was the blood side, the blood line of the cardioplegia line. And so what I did was, so it was split. So what I did was we clamped the line, pulled it out of the roller pump, of course, appropriately cleaned the line up, cut it, added a connector, and then just walked the tubing around to get it so that the connector obviously wasn't in the roller, because it would crush it, it wouldn't work. And we had plenty of extra tubing to do that. So that's what we did, and that's what happened. And so it was, it wasn't fun, but looking back on it now that you've been back doing cases for so long now, your perspective of that day, would it be different today if the same exact thing happened to you?
I think it enters my mind every time I use that single pump with two lines through it.
Uh-huh.
And I think about would I do it the same way? More than likely, for me to find 2 1/4-inch connectors and a 1/4-inch line, if I was by myself, what was lucky is there was 2 of us in that case.
Uh-huh.
But if it was just me, I would have grabbed a whole new cardioplegia set and just put a new one in.
Yeah, okay, but
if I was by myself.
Right, but you would have, right, exactly. But you would have just said, hey, I've got a little leak back here. I've got to change this. In other words, because I stayed calm. You were a little excited.
I was a little excited, yes.
Yeah, you were a little excited, a little more excited than I was at the time. But looking back on it now, I guess my point I'm trying to make is, has all the years since then, all the experience you have since then, changed the way you would have, not what you have specifically done, but how you would have reacted to the problem from a physiologic perspective, or from a communication perspective, or whatever it may be?
Right.
Do you think you would handle it differently?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
The more the more problems you go through and handle, the better you become at doing that. I had a case the other day where it was the outlet of our oxygenator was kinked.
Yeah.
Pretty tightly, and I should have noticed it before we went on bypass, but I didn't.
Agreed.
Everything primed up fine, but when we went on bypass, I'm running 3,000 RPMs and getting like 3 liters of flow, and I'm going, this is wrong, and the pressure was low on the line, because where we monitor our pressure is after the oxygenator.
Distal, yeah.
So I'm thinking there's a shunt open somewhere, or this pump isn't really reading the real pressure, or something is wrong. It took a little bit of time, probably a good minute, to figure out what it was. But I sent the text message out. I think this is a really good show, because talking about things that go wrong, every time something like that happens, I send out a text to our group and say, hey, this is something I saw, this is something that happened, and watch out for this, because it's way better if only one person experiences it.
No, I totally agree with you, and that's part of what our business is. Patrick, I'll like to get your opinion about this, but when you look at what we do for a living, there are, on any given day, there are innumerous ways in which something can go wrong that we usually catch 90% of them before it really does or becomes an issue. But there's a lot going on back there. It's busy. It is. It's busy. And it becomes an art. It becomes a feel. It becomes a sense of, what's going on. But I don't know that, I don't know. Do you really think that a second perfusionist, going to John's point, do you really think a second perfusionist during that case would have made a difference to you finding what the issue actually was? Or do you think you were going to find it no matter what?
I don't like having another perfusionist. I mean, it's fun to have another perfusionist around, because we all get along, and it's fun to talk and hang out.
What if you don't get along with them?
It's not the best route to go.
What if you don't get along with them?
Well, no, I prefer to work alone. I really do.
Me too. I think we agree with that. I think there are, again, there's some people that don't. There's some people that think you should have 2. I mean, that does exist. It's rare. It's rare. And it's extremely...
I think there was a law in Virginia or something. There was a state that passed a law that they had to have 2 perfusionists.
California has a rule that there has to be 2 cardiac surgeons. Yeah, I don't know if you knew that or not, but there's a law in California that says you have to have 2 cardiac surgeons do a case. Only 1 perfusionist, but you have to have 2 cardiac surgeons. That doesn't make sense to me.
Expensive.
It's not only extremely expensive, because you imagine, you're doubling the cost, and to what benefit? I just don't think anybody has ever been able to show that I'm aware of. And if somebody has that data, if somebody can show that really does cut down on accidents, problems, whatever the case may be, I'd certainly be willing to entertain it. I'll redo this program with their information, and we can debate it. They can talk about what their perspective is. I'm certainly open to that because, I mean, I have an opinion. My opinion is based on some level of experience. You have your opinion, and yours is based on experience. I would say a younger perfusionist, maybe, who could find themselves in very easily solvable situations, but just doesn't have the experience. I think that's what worries me sometimes, is that you get these guys who have, finished their training and they go to some community hospital somewhere and they're by themselves, and they may have learned well where they went to school. I mean, a lot of these training programs, I think, do a phenomenal job, do a very good job, put out some great students. But when you just don't, I mean, it takes time. Experience can't be gained in any way except repetition and doing case after case after case and being confronted with situations over and over again. And in today's environment, when I grew up, when I was younger and in this business younger, in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, it wasn't like it is now. It's a lot more tightly regulated and monitored, and the legal system is a lot more prevalent in cases, and know who perfusionists are, where they didn't have a clue who we were back in those days. So I think that a lot's changed, and I think there may be some advantages. I just don't know what they are.
Well, I think that speaking of the younger people coming out of perfusion school, they have the advantage of, simulation. Because, I did a lot of cases when I was in school, but, we didn't really have any catastrophes that I had to handle. With simulation, you really get an advantage, I think. And most of them probably have that kind of experience. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think simulation is good. I think it's good. I think it may teach you how to, it may be good at teaching you how to process, problems in terms of how to manage the stress and work through a problem in a linear or in a logical way. But I don't think you can simulate going from people who think you've got the easiest job on the planet and that you make too much money. I've heard that before a billion times in my life. You hardly ever work. Look at what you do. You just sit there. Give me enough bananas. I can teach a monkey to run that pump. I've heard it all. But when it's all falling apart, the entire room, from the surgeon, anesthesia, nurses, first assistants, scrubs, the whole 9 yards, even people from the outside, they start selling tickets. They all are standing there staring at you, not saying a word, and hoping beyond hope that you figure this out, because there's a real problem here. I've had it fall apart. And you know what? Say what you want. I don't get paid for a routine 2-vessel cabbage that has no problems. Go on, chip shot, go on, come off, everything's fine, send the patient to the unit, they're out of the hospital in 3 or 4 days, and they're doing great and everybody's happy. I don't get paid for that. I get paid for when it all goes wrong. And fortunately, that doesn't happen that often. But when it does, we're the most invaluable person in the room. So we go from monkey to hero in one day. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's what I called in to recall, was that one case that we had.
I did remember that. I'm glad you brought it up. I've got so many stories. Dude, I could sit here for another 3 hours. I'm not going to, so don't worry, everybody. I could stay here another 3 hours. I've got story after story after story.
I think of it as, in The Shining, when the elevator opens and all that blood starts coming out and rolling towards you. That's kind of what that pump head looked like when that tubing split.
No, it didn't, Patrick. It was a little spritz of blood. Give me a break. Dude, you are just seriously exaggerating here. It wasn't that
It's
bad.
a TV show. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's not that. It wasn't that bad. You definitely, I think today you would probably look at that same thing and say the same thing I just did. Yeah, we lost maybe 5 cc's of blood. That's all. It wasn't an elevator full of blood. All right. Thanks, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
Okay,
Bye.
Joe.
Bye.
Have a good show.
Bye. All right, everybody. We finished. We got through it. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed the heck out of it. Thanks for listening to all of my stories.